This is the farmer education session, and we have KaZoua Berry from Big River Farms and David Van Eeckhout from the Good Acre and Annalisa Holtberg from University of Minnesota Extension here. I'm going to let them take it away, and we're going to start with KaZoua.
Thank you, you guys, for allowing me this opportunity to share some of the things that we are doing. My name is KaZoua Berry. I am the Big River Farms Farmer Education Manager, and you guys already heard from Laura about what our programming is about, so I won't hash into that too much and go into deeper dive about experiences. And I'm also a farmer. So I am a mother, educator, student, farmer, entrepreneur, land steward, and foodie. So it's a big thing to digest, but I think this allows me the opportunity to connect with our farmers on a different level than just being someone who hasn't farmed before. Or, you know, I love being able to share experiences with all the moms who are farming, because they are always loving. Like, our farmers they will chase you down with a bag of corn, basically. So we have incredible farmers that we work with, and I am very lucky to have my job. And these are my kids in our farm stand. And this is just some kind of food that I made because I was really hungry and it was quick. So Big River Farms education program, I won't hash into that too much, but we provide a lot of, it's land-based, and we provide education in the wintertime. And I'm not going to go word by word with these topics, but so these are just some of the general topics that we focus on during our winter education. We have about 3 different program areas. So we have our education, we have the operations, and then we have our market. So I'll talk about the market in a sec here, but then with the operations, we also help farmers with initial tillage of the land and bed prep and things like that, but we provide assistance and hands-on opportunities for them in the field. And we provide about a 1/4 acre coming in if you're a beginning farmer. And then if you have shown us that you have, you know, skills enough to grow on more land, then depending on the evaluation, we give you more land, basically, for the following season, that is. Our programming, we have not just the education in the wintertime, but then we also have our field days. And one thing we realized this year about field days is that if you want rain, you just schedule a field day because it will rain. So with this drought, that's been really helpful for the land, but not so helpful for our field days. And our field days can be long. It can be 3 hours or the whole day. And we do farm tours either at Big River Farms or farms around us. And then sometimes farmers can put in a request. For example, we have a farmer who doesn't live too far from us, and she is growing ginger and she's growing, you know, mushrooms. And so if farmers are interested in it, we will schedule a farm tour to go over there. So we'll take our farmers and other farmers who are in our network, we will share that information and we'll all go over there and do a farm tour over there. We also provide space for skill sharing. So last year we did, during one of our farmer appreciation moments, some of the farmers wanted to show how they shared, you know, saved seeds. And so we provided that opportunity, and it was really cool for us to see farmers who have been farming with us for 7 seasons and farmers who are brand new to the program to come and watch how seed saving happens, because I think we all save our seeds a little bit different for some different crops. And so being able to see the high interest level of those farmers who have been farming for a long time, who haven't, like, we have home farmers who don't know what to do with sunflowers. So our native farmers were like, well, we use sunflowers as a way to block out cross-pollination between these corn. So it was really cool for our farmers to come and to share that, and they're like just taking it all in. And now we have like a ton of sunflowers growing all over our fields because of that seed saving session last year. And then we have on-farm demos. We have about 15, anywhere between 13 to 15. Sometimes I get the number confused because I'm a farmer too there, and I don't count myself as a program participant because I just use the land there and just a small portion of land where nobody else wants to use because it's really rocky. And people were like, we've been trying to farm there for years and we can't farm there. So it's just been fallow for 6 seasons. So I didn't consider me and my husband as a farmer in the program. So whenever I say the numbers, it can be confusing to people because people are like, well, we thought you actually have 15 people, but really, technically, we only really have 13 farmers and our farm teams, sorry, and the teams consist anywhere between one farmer to like a family of 7 to 10 people in one team. So we have a very diverse scale and number of who is farming a plot. But we provide demonstrations. So we do drip irrigation, but we also have a farmer who found out this impulse sprinkler system where he helped put it together and he showed a lot of our farmers. He even showed the operations team at Big River how to install this this pole that has like a spinning impulse thing. I'm probably not even saying it right. David probably knows the name of it better than I do. But basically we have a lot of those, we have different watering systems at the farm because we have different farmers. So we don't provide systems where we're like, this is the only way that you can farm here. The unique thing about our program is that farmers come from different walks of life and they come from different ways of farming. So they can bring in their skills and how they farm, and they can share with one another what the best way for them is. And so people can try out different things and different methods, and they're always sharing tools and equipments with one another. So some farmers coming in may not have the money to purchase equipment, but they can borrow from another farmer without having to risk such financial loss at the beginning if that tool doesn't work for them. The cool thing about our farm is we have group learning where like I said, we have a team of 13 farmers and we provide interpretation services. So our main languages right now are Hmong, Somali, and Spanish that we provide interpretation. And it does, most of the time people were like, well, it's costly. It costs a lot of money to provide interpretation. But honestly, anytime you do budgeting, you just have to budget it. And moving forward, if that's something that you want to do with your program or whatever organization you're working with and they want to do interpretation or when you talk about equity, that should be at the forefront because language is so important. So some of the challenges that we have with group learning is the language barrier, but Mei Lee, she's our farmer operations specialist, but she's been the farm mentor with the farmers for over 10 years. And she said a very important thing where she's like, farmers may not be able to understand my language, but we can understand each other by doing things together. So, sometimes you don't need verbal exchange to show each other how to farm a certain way. So that is a challenge, but that's also another beautiful thing is because you learn to speak in a different way. You use your nonverbal language to show one another. Another challenge is that because it is an incubator farm and we provide the resources, that the resources are finite. So right now we have an issue with not having enough harvesting containers or buckets for people. They're like completely gone. Even though we have like 150 of them, they're just gone because it's a really high harvesting season. And so those kind of issues arises throughout programming, and you just kind of have to figure out what the best way to deal with it through communication. So communication is another challenge because farmers are so busy and sometimes calling them doesn't work, texting them doesn't work, emailing doesn't work. You just have to track them down. I do a lot of field tracking in a day when I see farmers are driving into the field and I've been trying to track them down. I would literally take our truck and drive to go catch them because I know if I don't catch them right now, I would not see them for another week or so because they're just so busy. So communication is a really big problem doing in a group learning setting, especially when there's like mandates or things like that. For example, with the mask requirement, like the new updated things with the mask. Like I know that when I go back to the farm tomorrow, I'm gonna have to go track people down just to let them know that we've changed our mask mandate and that they have to start wearing masks when they're indoors again. So, and you can't assume that if you put up a sign in English or in that language that people can read it, because you cannot assume that Hmong farmers can read Hmong or Spanish or Somali, etc. So you cannot assume any of those things. But the benefits outweigh these challenges. I know that there are other challenges that can be listed, but I also want to highlight the benefits. A great benefit is that these farmers are always willing to teach and help. We have a 10-foot deer fence, but sometimes people forget to shut the gate. So for the past month and a half, we've been doing a lot of deer chasing out of our field. And they just know that when I'm driving around with the truck, that it's deer chasing time. Like, we need to go together and start chasing this deer out of the fence. So doing it on 50 acres is quite the challenge. So farmers are always willing to help, but not just with like organizational things. We hire or contract our farmers to teach one another. So we have a farmer who's been in our program for a while, or we know that they have a certain set special skills. Then during the education program, we contract with them and have them teach the farmers, because I think farmers are more willing to listen to farmers than educators. So we've had funding set aside to provide stipends for our farmers to do that. Another benefit, once again, is like the skill sharing with tools as well too, because we have so many weeding methods, so many methods of growing, plant spacing and things like that. And having an incubator farm is really unique, where farmers can drive through before they get to their plot. They're driving through other people's plots and they can see like, oh, what is that you're growing? Why are you growing that? And they will go ask the farmer like, what it is that you're growing, why you're growing. And because of the cultures that we have and the diversity that we have, farmers are always curious, and they get to glean that information and that knowledge right there on the plot that they're farming. So I think that's a really, really cool opportunity for our farmers to have with one another. And also seed sharing is really important within our community, because I don't know if you guys have noticed, but there's been like sort of a seed shortage at the beginning of the season, where a lot of seeds were just gone or not available and accessible. And there were farmers who saved a lot of seed of a variety that another farmer wanted, and they're able to communicate with one another and share seeds that way too. And when a farm team isn't doing well or feeling really discouraged, I think it's nice to have a community of farmers to share with one another. Like, we had this really bad irrigation issue at the beginning of the farming season, where one or two farm teams, they feel like they were being singled out. They feel like they were water wasn't working well for them, so they thought that we were controlling the pressure of the well, but it wasn't us. It was literally like, it was too hot, so it was tripping out our well and the water was shut off. And so being able to verbalize that to staff, but then also to the rest of the farm teams, other farmers started speaking up and saying, oh, we are experiencing that same reason, like the same experiences, like we are noticing that our pressure is not doing well. And so we figured out a system where you use drip irrigation when it's hotter. So the time that you can use your impulse sprinkler or overhead sprinkler is when in the morning time or in the evening, and then during the day is when you use drip irrigation. So we had to do a lot of troubleshooting just to keep the health of our community, but also making sure that farmers are feeling comfortable enough to troubleshoot these problems, or not feeling like they're being singled out, or that we are sabotaging the operation or things like that, because we are a nonprofit organization. So they may not see that they have any power or control, but I think really trying to have a healthy relationship between the farmers and also the organization is really important. So equity for us, it's a journey. It's the Food Group of Minnesota is, we have our equity statement, and they are also doing work on the side of the food bank, but at the farm, starting when we used to be MFA, the targeted audience were immigrant farmers, and now it has evolved into like serving a range of farmers who are Black, Indigenous, people of color, and also women. So we, like I said earlier about the language piece, we provide interpretation, and not just that, but not just within our programming. So if we have farmers who, for example, for the CFAP, the loan forgiveness, or not loan forgiveness, sorry, a whole different topic. For the CFAP, that was challenging for some of our farmers to even fill out the application. So any grant or any loan opportunities, those are hard for them to fill out. So we can't just send an email or post it or put it in their email, their mailbox, and expect them to be able to take initiative to go apply for these programs. If we identify that these are the farmers who can really use this money, or this is something that really fits with them, then we would do that extra work to work with them and say, what kind of assistance do you need? Do you need somebody to actually sit down and help you fill out physically? Or do you need somebody to just read it for you and then you can fill it out? So there's like different ways that you can learn about your farmers. So equity is beyond just the systemic, it's also that interpersonal relationship that you have with the farmers and the people you are working with, making sure that you know their needs and that they're comfortable enough and they trust you to share those needs, because it's a vulnerable thing to feel like you can't even fill out this application, that you need somebody to help you. Like, we have to be really sensitive to those kind of needs and not shame anyone or not talk to them in a way where they're not like, don't speak louder in English, because that doesn't help them. Like, they heard you the first time. It's just the language is challenging. Representation is extremely important for us. So the reason why we like to hire and contract our farmers to do the education work is because of that representation piece, the representation of farmers, teaching farmers. We have a very diverse group of farmers. So, you know, having different cultures and people who look like one another to teach one another. And also making sure that our partners who we're working with and whoever we're bringing in, that they're also very sensitive to the cultures of our farmers. Like, I get so many inquiries from a lot of different organizations or startup groups that want to meet our farmers or want our farmers to go do something for them, but I'm always trying to like screen them out and making sure that they're not just trying to appropriate our farmers. So as an organization or as groups of people who are going to be working with BIPOC farmers, you need to be that shield too, to be sensitive to that. And then also asking farmers, like, if this is something that they are interested in doing, and if this is something they are interested in doing, and if these systems or people are reaching out to you that may not represent the group of people who you would think it would be safe for your farmers, then you can try to communicate and say, what can this organization do to provide a safe space for your farmers so that they can do this work or interchange the skills or things like that. I've already talked about interpretation, so I don't have to hash that out anymore. One really, really cool thing about our program that everybody loves is our mentorship program with Mei Lee. She's our mentor. I also provide mentorship, but then also some farmers kind of adopt one another as mentors. It's a really cool, it's not like set in stone where they're like, well, this is my mentor, but for sure they're always like willing to share skills, and those who have been here there the longest, they are more than happy to share, you know, like walk by another farmer's plot and say, hey, I see that you're doing this. This looks like it's kind of challenging for you. How about you try this thing? And then they form that relationship that way. So Mei Lee, our mentor, she drives, when she has time, she drives throughout the farm every day to check in with farmers to make sure that they have everything they need, or there's some farmers who don't know when to harvest carrots or when to harvest certain produce, you know, or even how to harvest certain things. So even though we provide education in the wintertime, we also want to make sure that what they are learning are being reinforced in the field. And when the farming season begins, it is insane to even try to remember all of the stuff that you learn in class. So it's a really cool opportunity for farmers to ask questions there and then. And we have staff who are at the farm too. So last year was really challenging because we didn't have a lot of staff presence because of COVID. So a lot of us had to work from home. So trying to troubleshoot farm stuff over the phone is really hard when I can't see what the leaves are looking like or what the soil is looking like. So now that I'm at the farm more, it's been a breath of fresh air to be able to like go into their field and say, oh, the reason why, you know, this is happening is because, you know, it looks like you have some nutrient deficiency going on, or yes, this looks like flea beetle damage. So things like that, that mentorship piece is super important. And one thing that we're trying to work on is providing a transitional mentorship piece where our farmers who do buy land offsite, they are still also in need of mentors. And so having to, so that's something I am currently working on is, you know, building an arsenal of mentors who are outside of our program that can also help our farmers who have transitioned off to their own land. Technical assistance is a really important thing that we have. I provide that too, but we also contract with somebody who used to be the farm manager at Big River Farms, and she helps our farmers with things that I'm not able to. And the really cool thing about our technical assistance is that she can do business planning. So she can actually sit with our farmers and look at their business plan, or she can start them on like the initial path of that. But that can be also challenging because I think farmers, not a lot of farmers coming in have that entrepreneurship model. So that could be a whole nother topic too. And but not a lot of farmers have that, you know, mentality coming in. So it's a little challenging to try to get farmers like, what do you really want to do with your farming? Do you just want to farm, or do you want to you know, make money, and how much percentage of that and things like that. The cool thing about our program is that we have a market specialist, and so we have our CSA and our farm to food bank, which is through the food group where we pay farmers, we give farmers money to basically harvest excess produce from their field and send it to the food bank or the food shelves, like our food shelf partners. But we also have a lot of pop-up market opportunities through other partners, like people know our organization, so they're constantly like emailing us about, hey, do you have enough farmers or a farmer who is interested who can come and sell at this pop-up market or things like that. So honestly, most of the time our farmers are just so busy around this time of year that with the pop-up markets, most of our farmers are not going to have time to do those markets, but those opportunities are there for our very beginning farmers who don't have any markets at all. So since we are an incubator farm, we provide those, we provide tractor training. We have tools where farmers initially starting out with any business, I think it's just really challenging, but it's extra challenging if you're a BIPOC and immigrant farmer where you don't have the revenue or the space or even the skills to start this type of, you know, business venture. So our program is really cool in a way where we have a lot of those tools available. You know, we have our greenhouse, our pack shed, our cooler space, we have tools, we have tractors, things like that. And then we also have our farm store where a lot of farmers don't know where's the best place to buy flats or where's the best place to get irrigation things. So we have those things available most of the time for farmers to buy from us. And we also teach them how to order their own things too. So this land-based education model is a really unique tool to help farmers. And I think this is a good way to translate what equity is, because we are not charging a lot of money where it's just $250 an acre. And some farmers starting out, they only start out with a quarter acre. So it's not a lot of money that they have to put up. And then we also provide scholarships for farmers who absolutely cannot pay their way into the education. And then we also have people who are in our program who are not people who farm at the farm. They have their own land, or they have a big backyard and they're interested in growing food so that they can sell one day, but they don't know where to start, or they feel like they've tried other programs and it hasn't really been helpful, or they want a community that looks like them. So coming into our program is a really nice way for them to kind of get their foot in the door. So this is a really cool tool that I really love about our market program, is that we have an aggregated farmers market through Kingfield, and I think that's in South Minneapolis. And so basically we rent the stall as Big River Farms, but we provide, we contract with one of our farmers who can take the lead of in this model, where basically farmers who may not have ever done their own farmers market before, or they have extra produce, or they just want an extra market without having to like commit to going every week. They come together and they put their produce together, and they go, one farm team cycles out or rotates out throughout the week, and they go sell it. And so they work out where this year, I think, is the farmer who is selling the produce, 100% of their own personal produce is there. They get to keep the money, but the other farmers who are sending their produce out with these farmers, the farmer who is selling that produce, they get to keep 25% of the profit. So it's a really cool way for farmers to kind of do this together without having to commit to a market every single week. And also a really cool way for farmers we have a couple of farm teams this year who have never done markets before and are nervous about it. So it's kind of risk-free in the sense for those farmers to try something out, or to try if this is something that they really want to do. And it's been a really successful program. We used to be the ones who would go and bring the farmers' produce as staff, and that would take 2 staff every weekend doing it. And I think just the last year, because of COVID, one of our markets that we also did in Stillwater, we decided not to go over there, and we just kept Kingfield. And we were like, why don't we just hire a farmer to do it, to take the lead? And that's what ended up happening last year. And this year is a rollover of that. And I think that's something we are going to try to keep, because I think it's a really great program, an opportunity for farmers to kind of say they've done market, they've had some kind of experience with market in order for them to be able to get, their stalls at certain farmers market. Because I know that there's some farmers market who will not allow you to have a stall there if you have never done a farmers market before too. So this gives people an opportunity and increased accessibility for them.
I had a question just about the incubator farmers. Are most of them working the farm full time, or are they doing this kind of in addition to working off farm somewhere?
Thank you for that question. That is a great question. So historically, majority of our farmers work full-time somewhere, and then they come farm. Some of them still do that, but this year has been the first year, I think, where we have at least 5 to 6 farm teams that actually farm full-time. So farming is their own, the main income or the thing that they're doing. And then we have like farm teams who are like couples, or like the husband will go work full-time and then come in while the wife is farming, or things like that. So we have those kind of situations, but that is a challenge, Dana. Thank you for bringing that up. That is another challenge that makes it hard too, not just for the actual farming in the field, but the education program too. Is during the winter time, farmers are not farming anymore, so they go pick up like a part-time or like a temporary job. So they're working all day, and then they have to come to this class that lasts like 2 hours or so in the evening. Is kind of challenging to kind of wrap around or deal with. So thank you I hope that answers your question.
Oh, it definitely does. We have a couple kind of beginning farmer programs as well, where we work with a lot of people who are working a full-time job, and then we're doing classes outside of that schedule. And I was just kind of interested to hear your approach to trying to get people all to be able to come together, or have a lot of that kind of group learning that you've been talking about, knowing that everyone's schedule probably is so busy.
Yeah, and that's really challenging. Like in the wintertime, we try to send the schedule out, or I do an in-season review with farmers, and I usually have an idea. Like last year, my in-season review was in October. So the farmers that I knew that were returning, I check in with them and say, hey, Monday nights and Wednesday nights from 6 to 8 are the times that I'm thinking about doing this education classes. Will that work for you? So I kind of survey and assess in that way. But then we also miss out on those who work all day and then they're just exhausted. So it's challenging because they come to class and they're tired, but then also because we had all our classes in Zoom. So you don't know if people are really sleeping in class or not, or they're paying attention or not. But I'm also playing with the idea of potentially having one class on a Saturday too, because we do have a few farmers who work like in the middle of the day into the evening, and so they never can make it, and then they're missing out on all of these classes. And you can see it when they do come and farm, and that they don't really know a lot of the updates and changes and things like that. So I think maybe just kind of getting to know your farmers and even asking them like, what works for you, you know? And maybe if you have to do just one weeknight and then one weekend, that might work. And then once another challenge is, once when the farming season starts, doing field days and doing like actual skill sharing days, those are really hard, because then farmers are just so busy all the time. So having them prioritize what field days work best for them, and that encouraging them to just come to a portion of it. And also field days are nice because we can invite other people. Like we get a lot of gardeners who have more time, or people who are just exploring farming. They haven't started farming yet, so they can come to those field days. So like opening that up to different groups of people kind of helps with your audience, so that you're not just talking to like two farmers who are anxious to go back into their field. So it's like a puzzle thing that you have to work with. Okay, so these are questions for you guys. So we are a food bank, and this is our Twin Cities mobile market picture that I went to go visit them a couple weeks ago. And this is basically a store, a bus, you know, a grocery store on a bus. It's really, really cool. If you ever get the chance to go visit one of our Twin Cities mobile market places, they go throughout the Twin Cities, and I just love that majority of the food on here, other than the peaches, the bananas, and cantaloupe, and maybe the grapes, like the majority of the produce on here are from local farmers. So this is something that our organization has been very intentional about, is getting local produce. And so a lot of them are from our own farmers, but also sourcing it from different organizations like the Good Acre and things like that really helps build or increase accessibility for people. So my question to you guys are, what do you currently have around you? You know, like Sarah said, you guys are throughout the Iowa state. So do you guys have like pockets where you need to increase these types of resource? Or not you, but you know, like, are there systems that need to be in place for you guys to have increased resources? Or do you already have some of these resources that you can think of and tap into?
I can answer that, at least for the Southwest region. So we're in Ohio, and Dane and I are the ones working on this beginning farmer training program. And so, you know, we're around Dayton, Ohio. And so there's one thing, our farmers are selling to a mobile grocery like you have. They have a truck instead of a bus.
Oh,
but,
cool.
It's their first year of operation. So they're going to be interested in working with local farmers. The organization is actually originally was working with the unhoused, and now it's sort of transitioned also into food as well. That's, I guess, a long-term progress. There's also a local co-op market that's opening this year. Or is Gem City already open, or is it not quite opened the doors yet? Dana, do you know?
Yeah, it opened about a month ago, or a couple months ago.
Okay, cool. I haven't actually been there yet. I should get there. And then, like, you know, the incubator farm that I'm working on is in a town called Trotwood, and they are just getting a farmer's market again that's run by the city. So I think there's development and stuff going on in the area. Definitely needs work though.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing, Mark. So do you know, with those different types of hubs or platforms, like, do you know that if there are specific things that those retailers are looking for farmers to have in place? Like, I know that Annalisa will touch a little bit more about the food safety part, because we do have a portion where we require our farmers to do food safety training, and we're also organic. So where there's like a lot of records, there's like a whole different system that we kind of weave into our education, where farmers, we want to make sure that they are doing all of these things to in order for them to sell. Like in order for our farmers to even sell to Big River Farms, they have to go through the food safety training with us. You know, Annalisa comes and teaches that class, but then we also do a hands-on pack shed food safety training on the farm as well. And then we're also certified through the good agricultural practice certification, where we get like gap audited every year. So we want to make sure that our farmers are doing all the things and all of our records are in place. So with that being said, are there certain things that you can identify that farmers need to hone in on, like those skills that they need to hone in on some more in order for them to sell to those retailers?
I know originally the Gem City market was going to require GAP certification, but they were having a hard time finding anybody that was willing and able to do that. So I think they've pulled back on that. Dana, correct me if I'm wrong. And Homeful is not requiring it. I think a lot of these are just starting up and they're sort of figuring out what their policies are going to be.
Sure.
I know we've done some food safety training. We've gotten some at least some training. I don't expect many of our farmers are going to go for a GAP certification. They're just going to be, at least not within the next few years, because they're mostly very, very small.
Sure.
But I think it's something that we've been cognizant of, and we're trying to have trainings relevant to that.
Yeah,
I think that's
I could add on as well to that, because Mark's right. I think like the right now we haven't had a lot of pressure from like some of the retailers that we've been having conversations with around having the farmers GAP certified right away. But that is something that always kind of comes up as potentially being a requirement in the future. I think, you know, one of the things for at least the group that I'm working with as well is most of them are, you know, pretty much brand new, in some cases, to growing, period. You know, whether it's on a garden scale or definitely on a farm scale. And others maybe have, you know, have grown in a community garden for a while, so are really familiar with plants and growing, but haven't kind of done it in more of a commercial way where they're planning out in such an intense kind of way. And so I think that's been, you know, trying to figure out how to maybe initially it's more kind of about exposure and like just kind of sharing information about these different possibilities, and then like over time kind of building up to, if there are some who are really still dedicated to it, then like supporting them more in, you know, I think like it sounds like a lot of the programs that you guys have going, like I love that you're contracting out with growers on the site to provide some of those like services to other farmers, and like paying them for their time and expertise, I think is really cool. So there's definitely interest in that, but I think a lot of the at least in one of our beginning farmer programs, the one that I'm working with, it seems like everyone's just kind of at almost just like this very beginning step of having aspirations of farming, but not as much experience.
Sure. And yeah, I definitely understand with the GAP certification, not a lot of our farmers are certified in GAPs. Like Big River Farms is certified, and then we have individual farmers who we basically would say they've graduated to like whole farm management status, because they've been farming for so long and they've have enough skills and they're really good with keeping their records that they can do their own GAPs training. So yes, you're right. And I think the thing is to just train people to be in the habit of record keeping, because that's a huge challenge, is trying to get farmers to just be in a good habit of keeping their records and making realistic goals, right? Like we have farmers who are like, oh, I'm growing on 1 acre and my goal is to make like $30,000, and like they've never had training where they never grew for production before. So kind of being gentle with them and being like, okay, let's walk this step by step and really making realistic goals so that you're not setting yourself up for stress, failure, and things like that. So I think that's really cool that you can identify the level of, farming experience that your farmers are doing, and that the needs, that they, that how you can continue to support them is really cool. Another question is, what communities are in need of your services? Like, not just communities as far as like farmers that you're serving, but then the food that the farmers are going to be, providing to those communities. Like, what are some community needs?
I'll just chime in that in some of our urban areas, at least in one of the communities that I work in, there are some food deserts, and they tend to be very low income communities. So figuring out a way to help those communities get affordable food to where they, and within close proximity to where they live, because they may not have access to transportation. And I love this whole bus mobile grocery store
Twin
idea.
Cities Mobile.
I've worked with a farmer group, not in Ohio, but in North Carolina, and there was a lot of discussion about trying to get something like this off the ground. And it was very complicated for people to figure out the logistics of getting produce to the, so I'm just really interested in this, how the logistics of how this kind of thing works.
Yeah, this is really a cool model. Actually, Twin Cities Mobile Market used to be owned by Wilder Foundation, and the food group merged with it last year, I think. And so the really cool thing about the pandemic last year, and also the social unrest, is that there were a lot of people in the community, Michelle, that started literally, like in Frogtown where I used to live. It's a food desert too, and we have community leaders who would just go to a park. They worked it out with some of the Parks and Rec people and say, I want to do a tent and have food here for people to come. So like a pop-up food shelf. So we had so many pop-up food shelves, and the food group learned about these pop-up food shelves. So the food group as an organization, so this is going back to some of the resources that you might already have connection with or might know of. And the food group started paying these leaders and funding the farmers who are bringing food to these pop-up food shelves. So even if you might not, like, if your organization might not have the funding to pay for it, for the food, to have these to increase local accessibility, maybe reaching out to your state agricultural department, or if there is an organization that, or even like not a lot of nonprofits who are willing to move around their budget in order to pay for farmers to provide food. It could be within a church or church parking lot. We had a lot of church parking lots that were filled last summer with these pop-up food shelves, or even pop-up stores. Like, we have this program called Fair for All, where we provide, people can basically buy food from us at a very, very reasonable price, and they are not getting it for free. So they feel like, they can still buy with in that way too. And so it's a really cool way for you to kind of assess what kind of programming that already exists, or what are all the partners that you might be able to list out and, do some small ask in order to make a big impact.
Thank you, KaZoua. So for time, we're going to move on to David.
So my name is David Van Eeckhout. I am the farm program director at the Good Acre. I have been working there for about 5 years now. My background is in farming. I started working for other farms in 1998. Basically, interning and things like that when I was in my late 20s. From there, I worked for other farms for about 5 years and then started my own farm in Western Wisconsin. We grew certified organic vegetables for 15 years, primarily marketed through a community supported agriculture type of a market. You know, at that point, I decided to make a shift and try and I was interested in helping other farmers. And I was also just very interested in the technical assistance and business sort of piece of farming, like, and really asking myself a lot of questions like, is this really possible to make a sustainable living farming? I have access to a lot of resources. I am pretty well educated, and I'm not sure that I can make this work. So it really brought a lot of questions with me to think about, like, you know, if people who have access to resources can't make this work, do we really want to be supporting other people in this work? And I mean, I just had a lot of questions around it. And so when this opportunity to work for the Good Acre came up, kind of as their, you know, for lack of a better term, kind of their private extension agent to work directly with their farmers on what they're experiencing in their fields and farmer education. I was really excited about, you know, doing something a little different with the education that I had developed over my history farming. So I transitioned to this job in 2017, offering support to the farmers who were selling directly to our food hub, primarily. Sometimes I offer support outside of that circle. But basically, the food hub had gotten to a time where they're having a lot of difficulties with actually getting what they thought they were going to get when they placed orders with farmers, or confirming that they were going to get things packed the right way, or the right ripeness coming in, or even just to get somebody out on the farm to see what was going on when farmers were having problems. So that was kind of really how my role began there. Was to get somebody's eyes on the ground, seeing what is possible and what is going on the farms. Over time, it's gotten much more complex than that, because there's a lot more work to be done in terms of supporting farmers. And one thing I'll just say about that is, as a farmer, it's been very valuable to have someone on staff who was a farmer to go out and work with farmers. Much like KaZoua talked about their mentorship piece, farmers do understand farmers really on a very base level. You know, you've been there, you know what it's like to have all of your investment in a crop at risk at any given time, you know, all season long, whether it's drought, whether it's thunderstorms, whether it's hail. So having that kind of visceral connection with farmers has been really good for our program, and good to connect that way. It's having my ability to think like a farmer adds a lot to my organization's ability to contract things and do things in a way that really supports farmers rather than exploits farmers and their labor. So just to give you an example, like, if you have a food hub and you know you're going to need 50 cases of zucchini a week, if you don't have the farmer voice at the table, it's easy for a food hub purchaser to say, you know, this is great, we want to support a lot of farmers, we're going to get 50 cases of zucchini from farmer A, we're going to get 50 from farmer B the next week, and 50 from farmer C the next week. And a buyer might think, wow, I'm doing a great thing here by helping out 3 different farms. But since they're not a farmer, they don't understand that, you know, zucchini has a harvest window, you know, between 4 and 6 weeks. And so if you have to grow enough zucchini to provide that one order of 50 cases, you have 5 more weeks of that same volume of zucchini now you don't have a market for. And so those are kind of ways that a farmer at the table can really help kind of guide an organization and make sure that it's making decisions and it's doing its planning and its contracting in such a way that it's helpful to the farmer and not just creating another market headache for a farmer. So that's one reason why I just kind of like to emphasize that it's important to have a farmer voice at the table if you can within the organization, just to know those kinds of opportunities all come with other sets of questions that can be challenging. So when we're talking about farmer education, and I saw this quote from a farmer down in Mississippi in an article earlier this year, and he was really talking about the opportunity for loan forgiveness. And within that, there's a lot of money for the USDA to continue to offer technical assistance. And his quote was just great. We've just been trained and educated to death. That's not what we need anymore. We need access to markets, and we need help with loans, which is a completely different topic than what we're talking about today. But I do think sometimes that, especially with webinars and educational components coming from like the state level, it can be overwhelming, and we see a lot of the same farmers having gone through the same education courses multiple times. That this is why I really advocate for more one-on-one technical assistance, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. One thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about the programs that we have at the Good Acre, and when I talk about programs, I'm really talking about market channels more than I'm talking about any sort of educational programming. So at the Good Acre, for the farmers that we work with, we basically have 3 market opportunities. We have this first one called LEAF, which is the Local Emergency Assistance Farmer Fund. That was actually started last year because of COVID and farmers markets shutting down when farmers already had seedlings in the greenhouse or crops in the ground, and really wanted to provide a market for farmers that had very few barriers, where they could get a really decent price, kind of similar to what they would get at farmers market. I don't need to go down the rabbit hole on that program, but it was very successful, and we continue it this year. The next program that we have as far as a market channel goes is our Farm Share, which is like a CSA type share program. We call it a farm share because I'm a former CSA farmer. I don't want to call it a CSA because it doesn't contain a shared risk component. You know, I don't think it's fair to other CSA farms to call it that. So we call it a farm share, but it's basically a similar marketing model. We're aggregating produce from a whole bunch of different farms, and people are purchasing a share, and they come and pick up their box each week or pick it up at one of the delivery sites we have. And then thirdly, we have a wholesale market channel. Our wholesale market channel varies from farm to school, to hunger relief, to just, you know, general restaurants and things like that. We do some work with grocery stores, not very much. But what I wanted to talk about in this slide is just kind of how we think of these market channels as it pertains to the farmer's costs of production. And so in the LEAF model, really what we're trying to do is we're trying to have very few barriers. Basically, the farmers can bring in anything that they have. They just have to bring it in on a certain day between 8 and 4. It also has to be on the list of products that we will take, which is, it's not a bad list. It's probably about 30 items, and it has to be packed in the size box that we require. We don't need them to label each box individually. We don't need them to weigh it. We don't need them to call us and let us know what's coming. We wanted to create a program where farmers really almost had no barriers to entry and participation, and could really take advantage of the fact that they were, you know, they needed to get things out of their field that they didn't have a market for. So beyond that, we have our Farm Share program, which is a little more complicated for farmers. There's a few more barriers. They need to have more volume because our Farm Share is quite large, you know, so we have about 500 shares in the farm shares. So they wouldn't need to provide 500 of something, but we might at least want to make sure they're providing 100, if not 200, so that we don't have to be working with, 5 different farms for every crop. If we have 8 crops in the box that week, that gets to be too complicated. So they do need to have more volume. They need to understand the standards a little better so that when we're putting bunches of kale in a box, some people aren't getting 2 leaves and some people are getting 20 leaves. And they need to bring it in a shorter time window and have it basically ready to be packed into boxes. So that comes with a few more barriers. That it still has pretty good pricing, so I'll talk about pricing in a sec. Wholesale then creates the most barriers. Everything needs to go into new packaging. It needs to be weighed. It has to be labeled. It has to, go along with our wholesale standards, which are more rigorous. So, your cucumbers can't be yellow. They need to be, 8 inches long. And, so we're basically trying to create a situation where farmers can learn by accessing different markets. So it's a little bit of a different model in terms of, we don't do as much formal, we really don't do much sit down formal education. We really are trying to do a lot more educating as the farmers are marketing into the different channels that we have. And then as far as pricing goes, with the LEAF program, those are the farmers that are kind of newest to this time, to doing something other than farmers market. And because of that, they're usually smaller farmers, and they have the highest cost of production. So the curved line behind this graph is what's known as like a cost curve in microeconomics. The cost of production is going to go down as volume increases. And it's important for us in the way we establish these programs to understand where the farmers are at and what their costs of production are, and how we match them to a program based on that cost of production. So a farmer that's only done farmers market, has 2 acres, and they come to us and want to sell wholesale, that's not the farmer we want to offer wholesale to, because we can't pay them enough. They don't have the economies of scale. They don't have the efficiencies. They don't have the equipment. They don't have the kinds of things that in place on their farm that's going to make it worthwhile for them to take a low price that the wholesale market offers. So that's where we would suggest, they start with the LEAF program. It's got the highest prices of these 3 programs because it is meant for farmers who have the highest cost of production. So as you choose farmers for different markets and programs, it's really important to consider what their costs of production are. If they're doing all hand labor and it's primarily in the family, the costs of production are very, very high. And that is not a farmer I want to steer towards wholesale. So as farmers grow, they get more experience, or they say, actually, we're going to drop all of our farmers markets instead of just one of them so that we can concentrate more on growing fewer crops just for you. Then we can move them along that ramp, up to farm share or to wholesale as those costs of production go down, because now they're not growing 40 different things for farmers market, because as you all know, anyone who attends farmers market wants to be a one-stop shop. So as they have the ability to not do that because they're not marketing to farmers market anymore, they can just grow 8 things or whatever. And that really does bring about some efficiency, some economies of scale, so that they can start to realize that what they thought was a really low price, now they have a clear understanding that, like, if I can bring 50 cases of that thing at once, I can make more in that one drop off that takes me half an hour than I can at 4 or 5 farmers markets that I go to, and so once people kind of can change that scale and start to have that realization, it makes quite an impact in how they think about the pricing. Because, I mean, honestly, we do have to get lower, we do have to be able to pay lower prices as we go into these other markets, because otherwise we don't have a market for the product if it's priced too high. So that's kind of how we think about it. That's how I think about it a lot. And we think about like, how can this interfere with other things we have going on? How do we not have competition between these markets, which we definitely do, and it does cause problems sometimes where if someone is part of the farm share program and also part of the LEAF program, they might actually say, I'm getting a price at LEAF, better price at LEAF, I'm going to sell it over there instead of what I said I would sell to the farm share. So we do have some problems like that. You know, and to give you a sense how many farmers have in these market channels. So this year we have 40 different farms in the LEAF program, and all the farmers in the LEAF program are BIPOC farmers, primarily Hmong growers, although we have some from different African communities as well as Latino farms. The farm share contracts with about 20 farms in a given year, and wholesale we have contracts with probably about 32 or 33 farms this year. And there is some crossover between them. So that isn't all unique farmers. So we're probably working with about 50, probably a little more than 50 farms. So one thing I want to talk about here a little bit is just the challenge with incubating farmers and helping farmers build capacity that I've really come to see is that we also have to simultaneously build the market. And if we're not building the market, then we need to really rethink how we're building capacity and how quickly we're building capacity. Because the last thing we want to do is encourage farmers to move in a direction that and then leave them hanging out to dry because there isn't a place for their crop to grow. And we certainly have, and we've learned that through trial and error. There's no doubt that we've made that mistake where we helped a farmer move in a direction with something and then the market didn't support it. And that can be especially tricky if you're relying on farm to school as one of your markets, because farm to school can be a really challenging market. That is part of our wholesale market, but it's become a smaller and smaller and smaller part of our wholesale market because it's been too volatile and difficult to predict for the farmers. So that's why going into hunger relief and other opportunities has really meant that farmers are going to have the market in place when we help them build that capacity. So we also, you know, like I said, with those different programs, we want to make sure that we're matching farmer capacity to the market channel. And that also has to do again with the farmer's cost of production, which, you know, most farmers don't know what their costs of production are. So when I say cost of production, I'm making assumptions about what the farm has in terms of infrastructure, and just knowing that, like, I don't know how much it cost them to grow that tomato, but I know it was high versus medium versus low. You know, I don't need, ideally, I would like farms, you know, especially with my business technical assistance hat on, I would like all farms to know what it costs to grow things. But I think in this situation, I'm really wondering, is this a farm that has very high costs because their infrastructure is very low, you know? So that's kind of what I'm thinking about. I do a little bit of work with farmers on enterprise budgets so they can try and come up with, you know, what their costs of production are on individual items. But as you all know, you know, when you are growing a widely diversified vegetable farm, it's very difficult to track some of those costs. And we really try to focus on some simpler record keeping rather than getting too bogged down in the weeds with some of that. So my role at the Good Acre is really to do one-on-one technical assistance with farmers. And it's why I took the job. It's why I still have the job. I really enjoy it. I enjoy going to farms and talking to farmers. I think it's It's kind of a unique model. It's kind of like I am a private extension agent for the farms that sell into our organization. That's kind of the service I provide, is that I go out to the farm. Well, I can just walk you through kind of what I do on a farm visit. So when I go out to a farm, so this year I have visited probably 35 or 36 of the farms that we're working with. These are all ones that we've contracted with for wholesale. I want to make sure I got to all 32 or so of those that we have. So when I go out to a farm, I bring a copy of their wholesale contract, and we will walk around the farm. I'm going to want to look at all the crops that are on the contract and just kind of verify, number one, did the crop make it in the ground? Number two, did it make it in the ground in a timely manner, so it looks like it's going to mature when it should mature? Is the quantity there that to meet the contract? Are there any pest and disease issues? Are there water issues? You know, this year we're having a problem with drought up here in the upper Midwest. So a lot of farmers planted their onions for their contracts, but without access to irrigation, we're seeing onion sizes more in the 3 to 4 ounce range per onion rather than the 8 to 10 ounce range. So that means we're going to be short quite a bit on onions with farms. So I mean, it's getting a sense of that, seeing that those onions are maturing, but they're small, which means if they planned on having 80 cases for the contract, they may only have 40 cases because the onion is half the size it usually is. So that's something I would look at on a visit. I do delve into food safety on our farm visits. I will ask them about, hand washing. If it's obvious that they have a hand washing station set up, I'll just make note of that. Sometimes I'll even try and wash my hands when I get to the farm, because that's a good way to just test whatever they've got for a hand washing system. If it looks like they have hand washing, but it's a dry, empty bucket and there's no towels or soap, then, clearly I need to help them try and figure that out. I'll check out their packing area, see if it's clean, see if it can be sanitized, see if there's, if it's just shade under the trees, let them know that that's not acceptable. They need something, a barrier between trees and where they're packing. Make sure there are no animals cruising through the packing area. We don't really require food safety plans from our farmers currently, unless a specific customer requires it. But in lieu of that, we do our farm visits and I take notes about what the situation is. And I have some specific recommendations, I'll help them out. We typically have some hand washing stations available. We have some other equipment sometimes when we get funding for it. So that can be a way I can help too, is like, hey, it looks like you really need a table that would be easy to wash off here instead of this wooden thing, which is not great for sanitizing. I do have to ask questions like, where do they go to the bathroom? If that isn't clear, we need farmers to understand that it's an important part of food safety is to know, do you have a place to go to the bathroom? If you don't, do you go to the gas station? A lot of the farmers we work with don't own their own land, so they're renting land. So it may be a situation where they go into town to use the bathroom and they use their hand washing station, and that's fine, but we need to ask the questions. We need to know that, because that also lets the farmer know that we want to make sure that those things are safe for them as well. We'll talk about fertility. I'll ask them what they use for fertility. I'll ask them what they do for pest and disease control. I come from an organic farming background, so I don't have a lot of information for them as far as conventional chemicals go. So a lot of times if they have a conventional chemical question, I'll turn that over to Extension because they have better resources for that. But I still like to find out what they're using, make sure it's appropriate for the crop and the application. It's good to know fertility. A lot of farms that we work with don't actually apply much additional fertility. They're relying on their soils. So I definitely want to look at their soil type, see what kind of soils they're on. Or is it sandy? Is it loamy? Is it clay? Just to get a sense of like, hey, you know, this is a sandy soil, and that's why this broccoli is looking really yellow and is not going to do very well. If you want to try and grow this kind of a crop on this sandy soil, you're going to need to use more fertilizer, or you're going to need to, you know, choose a crop that's more appropriate to the soils you're growing on. I like to talk, since a lot of our farmers are renters, I like to talk to them about their land situation, you know, so how much are you paying for rent? You know, is the landlord fair to you? We do get situations where landlords can be challenging. They can try and kick people off of their land if, you know, for whatever weird reason, or they can just straight up overcharge people. You know, we've got some farmers that are paying, you know, $450 an acre for land that doesn't have any irrigation. And I think that's too much. And then that landlord also wants to charge them $50 to fill a tote of water every time they want one too, you know? And so I look for, you know, situations where I think farmers might be getting taken advantage of, and try and, you know, mitigate that with the landlord if I can. I mean, this list gets pretty long of the things that I do on my farm visits, and especially a farm that I haven't visited before, it can get kind of time consuming. I'm usually not at the farm very long, but I'll spend more time back at my desk, kind of assessing some of that stuff. But, you know, one of the biggest things that I think is really valuable to our organization out of my farm visits is that I can see if there are opportunities for things that we don't know about, because the farmer hasn't told us they're growing it, because the farmer has significantly better crop of something than most of the farmers we work with. Just seeing opportunities on farms. You know, I had a farm a few weeks ago I was on, who we're contracted with for some onions and some potatoes. And I was out there, and she had about a 1/4 acre of sweet potato vine that she grows for one of the farmers markets she does, that has a large African population that shops at it. And I said, you know, we are actually really looking for sweet potato vine, or would you be interested in selling some of that wholesale? And she was, yeah, I mean, because I'm tired of haggling over it at the market. She really, for whatever reason, that seems to be a crop, because they buy a lot of it. The customers at the market, they buy, you know, garbage bags full, and so they want to really heckle over how much for their garbage bag full. And she's like, I'm tired of heckling over it. I'd love to sell some wholesale. And our hunger relief partners are really interested in getting culturally specific crops if we can find them. So I mean, just there would have been no other way to know that she had that without me visiting and seeing it and asking about it. And we ended up buying 3 pallets worth of sweet potato vine from her, which I was shocked that she even had that much by the time we got it all done. So she was super happy. We were happy. And that's the kind of thing that wouldn't have come about unless somebody had been on the ground just to see what the farmer had that possibly we could really use. I think this type of assistance it's the best way to get to know the farmer and their family and their land and their needs. You know, it's really easy to think about what farmers need without actually getting really good information from them and finding out, like, actually, you know, I mean, we have a lot of talk about land access. And there are a lot of farms that struggle with land access, but a lot of the farms that we work with, actually, they don't mind renting land. They would like long-term rental situations so that they don't have to worry about having to change land, but they aren't necessarily looking for land to purchase, you know, and so it's having those conversations to find out that, like, yeah, I mean, I'll ask that question, are you interested in purchasing land? But a lot of times the answer is no, I like it here. This has been great. You know, we work with some people from the Hmong community who are elders, and they might be 70 years old, and they're not interested in purchasing a piece of land in their 70s. You know, they're pretty happy with their situation. So I think, again, having that opportunity to be on the farm talking about the real needs of each individual farmer really makes for better relationships, and it really makes us be able to target any sort of support that we're doing to where their needs really are. So those are all the benefits of one-to-one technical assistance, which I would call the gold standard of technical assistance, but it's not always practical, and it does have some drawbacks, you know, and the first and obvious drawback is it's very expensive. You know, by the time, you know, communication with farmers is always a challenge, as KaZoua was saying. So scheduling farm visits to 35 different farms actually takes a ridiculous amount of time. So by the time I've scheduled a visit and drove out to the farm, visited with the farmer, walked around, checked out the crops, see how things are doing, answer any questions they have, you know, I might come back to my desk and look up some resources I talked about with them so that I can send them some information. I might send them a link, or I might send a picture to Extension of a disease issue that I don't know what it is, or where they could take a sample if they want to take a sample, and write up my notes about the visit. By the time I do all that work, I would estimate that I've got between 6 and 8 hours in one farm visit. So it is very time consuming. And it's expensive. You know, your time is worth money. Therefore, if you're going to spend 8 hours just on one farm visit, it's expensive. But, you know, even if you're paying someone $30 an hour to do farm visits, you know, it costs you $250 to do that farm visit. But if you discover that they have, you know, $4,000 worth of sweet potato vine that you didn't know about, that you can now help them with, and it's good for your organization to move it through our system too, it looks like a pretty good investment when you look at it that way. But it is time consuming and it's expensive. You know, language barriers can be obviously an issue. I don't speak Hmong. Many of the farmers I work with speak excellent English, so it's not a huge barrier for our technical assistance that we offer. I do have a colleague on staff who's a Hmong speaker, so if I am working with someone who's more of an elder who maybe doesn't speak very much English, I might, you know, enlist him, especially if I have to talk about something like a pesticide application or something that gets technical and definitely has a safety component, that I want to really make sure that we're not having a communication barrier, because whenever safety's at stake. You know, a lot of everything else can be figured out. You know, cultural barriers is another one. I am a tall white person, you know, who walks around with a clipboard, and which is not always what people want to see coming towards them on their farm. And so that's why relationships are just so important. You know, hopefully, I almost never approach farmers who I don't know that are just out in the field, because I try and be really respectful of the fact that I know how I look in terms of, like, if you don't know me, I probably look like somebody from the government who's coming to ask you questions you don't want to answer. So I try to be conscious of that. I don't approach farmers, you know, sight unseen, like see someone out in the field, even though there's many times I want to do that, because I might be driving somewhere and see an operation that looks excellent and I want to stop in. But I also try and walk it back a bit and say, well, let's find out who that is and approach them either through a phone call or something like that, so we're not intimidating them. So I think that's something we really try and keep in mind. So when I go onto a farm, I want the farmer to see that David's there because they know me. We have a relationship already. It's not, I don't want that to be our first meeting. You know, and another challenge to this technical assistance and doing it one-on-one is, honestly, it's experienced providers. It's hard to find people who have enough farm experience that they can really talk farming with a farmer. And there's something about that, because farming is so all-encompassing, because it's small business, it's horticulture, it's water management, soil management. It's so many different things, as you all know, that it's finding someone who can be kind of a generalist for all of it can be really challenging, you know? So I mean, I'm lucky and I really love what I do, but honestly, I have to switch gears so fast sometimes that it hurts my head to think about it. And that's why it does take time to kind of decompress and write up your notes about what a farmer may need or what you saw on a visit. Is because you are switching gears all the time. And that's a challenging thing to find in your providers. You know, one of the reasons we kind of started out offering the service is because we weren't getting it from our local extension. You know, they just weren't providing any assistance really to the farmers that we were working with. Now that was 5 years ago, and I will say it has changed significantly since then. Our extension has gotten much more focused on specialty crop producers and being there for them and getting out in the field more. So that's been awesome. But that's kind of why we had to start doing this, is because somebody needed to, and it really was a need that wasn't being met. So with that in mind, you know, there is the question of why do we need to have this type of education in-house, you know, and instead of just relying on extension. And, you know, the one thing I say about that is that the education needs to happen in the field, not at the loading dock. So if a farmer comes in with something and it's all too big, it's all too over mature, it's, you know, whatever the problem is, the worst possible time, if you're trying to help those farmers, is to tell them that on the loading dock, where you're not going to accept their product, or you're going to grudgingly accept their product that they worked really hard to produce. And so my job is really to do that education in the field so that that doesn't happen. And it serves our organization's purpose as well, in that our product can then be overseen like that. So when farmers come in, we know what to expect a little more. Now, working with 50 different farms, we do our best. I mean, I'm the only person doing this job, you know, for the amount of farms we have. So obviously I can't control everything, but it's a start, and we do the best we can with it. The nice thing is, if we see things that are coming in wrong, we can make real-time adjustments, or I can even go out to the farm. Hey, you know, we have a farmer who brought in some broccoli that was yellowing a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to go out there tomorrow and take a look at it with him because he's worried about the rest of his fall crop. You know, we can make real-time adjustments like that as things are coming in, to say, okay, we need to go out and look at this because this came in like this, or whatever. You know, a lot of times I'm not there to see stuff on the dock because I'm out on farms, or so I rely on communication from our buyers and the people working in our warehouse to kind of tell me what's going on. You know, both the people who work at the Good Acre, you know, on the wholesale side, or even on the farm share side, it's actually really helpful also that I can be there to offer any farmer-based kind of education for other people who work at the organization, because they may not have come from a farming background either, most likely didn't. And so they may not understand that situation I talked about with the zucchini. So that's an opportunity for me to educate them. If you're going to contract zucchini with somebody, you have to contract zucchini with them for 4 weeks at least, so that they don't have to throw away the rest of it, you know, or kale or other things that are, you know, picked multiple times. So it can be really helpful to have somebody on staff who can do that kind of education with other employees. But the drawback also can be that it can create a conflict of interest. You know, a lot of times I consider myself working for the farmers sometimes more than the organization, because it's really, I'm trying to help the farmers succeed. But sometimes our buyers might be really working for the organization, and so we can get into conflict about, like, no, you can't charge that price, or you can't offer that price to the farmer. That's too low. They can't handle that price. So I'm going to fight with our buyer about what a reasonable price is, because I understand what the costs of production are for that farmer. I think that's a really healthy conflict, and it's really good to have that type of seat at the table to be able to say, nope, this is why this doesn't work for a farm. This is why this doesn't work for a farm. So that's kind of a few of the reasons why it's nice to have it in-house. So one of these are the decision-making factors we make when awarding contracts with farmers. We don't want to be in the job of picking winners and losers with who's going to grow what. We want to look at their resource base. We want to see what their soil resources, their water resource, their fencing, their labor. Do they have a past history of bringing in quality product? Did they know how to grow it? Do they know how to succession plant? Things like that. And do they have the infrastructure to support the level of crop that they want to grow? Those are mainly the factors that we look at when we're talking about who we're going to award contracts to. I can stop there, Sarah. So if people have questions, I'm happy to take questions.
I know there was one question in the chat for both you and KaZoua that I'll read, and then if anybody else wants to jump in with questions. So Dana was asking, you mentioned getting people started in the habit of record keeping is really important. That was for KaZoua. Could you share some more examples of how you do that without making farmers feel overwhelmed by the sheer volume of records to keep, which I think is something that you touched on, David. And then she said, we had initially planned on having farmers in our program keep records for organic certification standards, but have found that to be just too intimidating for many that are just getting started. Any thoughts from you and KaZoua on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a lot for getting started. I would start simpler, just keeping a journal of what they're planting, when they're planting it, so they know each year they can repeat what they're doing. But organic certification can be a heavy lift. I think people should focus more initially on business records. How much are they selling? What are their expenses? And what are they planting and when are they planting it? That's where I would start.
Yeah, that's really challenging because we are organically certified. And so we do have core sets of things that people do need to keep record of. And then our certifier, she's really, really amazing to work with. And so she's very forgiving too, but we do a lot of like double or triple checks. So basically, like throughout our whole education program, we're always emphasizing like, you need to have your greenhouse planting. These are the kind of records we need you to keep. Keep your seed packets. If you can't keep them because they're too bulky, then take pictures of them. Keep your receipts. There's like so many different things with organic that can be really challenging, but we do a lot of, we just keep walking through it. And then, so right before our organic certification happens, so even before the greenhouse, so we take it by step, right? March is when we do greenhouse planting. So before they can even plant it in greenhouse, we ask them to submit a plot plan. So just kind of like generally, what are you planning to plant, or did you already do your seed search? Did you already order your seeds? Submit those in, and then we walk through with them to see if they're keeping proper records. And then in April and May, I do a beginning season check-in with them to make sure that they are logging, actually doing it. And some of them don't do it. So then we actually walk them through it. So I set an hour and a half or so to walk the farmers through it. So like David said earlier about taking time to work with these farmers individually, it does take a lot of time. And then when our certifier comes, I also meet with the farmers before she comes, and then we go through all of the records to make sure that they have it. And then you have the post certification where some farmers might not be ready to have their sales record at that time. So you have to remind them. So there's like a lot of reminders and field checks and like really doing the hands-on work when it comes to this record. But it is so worth it, Dana. Like after 3 years of doing it with farmers, and the third or fourth year, it just becomes like a natural habit. It's really building those habits and values in them for those third, fourth, fifth years that you don't have to keep doing it with the same farmers again.
Thank you. And Dana, I know KaZoua shared a whole bunch of Big River Farms record keeping tools that were in that folder that I sent. So, and those are all just for manually writing it. Any other questions before we move on to Annalisa? Any questions for David or?
I guess a really quick question, David. So we're an 1890 extension which is a little different than University of Wisconsin or Minnesota, where we focus on underserved audiences and tend to do more hands-on interactive type training. So what are some things that you see that as educators that maybe we should keep in mind as we work with different groups of farmers, especially with beginning farmers, that would be helpful for those things that Extension could do?
And you mean in terms of like what?
Is it technical assistance? Is it pest management? I guess, what are some things that would be really helpful for Extension, or maybe just programming in general?
You know, actually, I would say, and KaZoua, you probably have some thoughts here too, but I would say, you know, from the farms that I work with and I go out, just getting an understanding of soil fertility, I think, is one of the bigger challenges that like, you know, if you're going to take off of this crop, you have to put something back, and you're not going to have that much to take off unless you're putting something in there. You know, this, you know, concept of the soil as a biological system and everything that's easy to understand when you are, you know, immersed in it, is a really difficult thing to get across to farmers, especially beginning farmers. So I would think looking, you know, if you have good opportunities to have resources where, you know, like, you know, we have one from the University of Minnesota that's just a simple, you know, kind of vegetable production guide that'll say, like, you know, in order to grow your 100 whatever, this yield of potatoes, you need this much nitrogen. And that's just a concept that a lot of the farmers that I work with, they don't really understand that concept. And in fact, if you tell them that, like, actually, if you're going to use this organic fertilizer, this 464, you probably need to spread 2,000 pounds of it an acre, they just think you're nuts. You know? So I think fertility is something that I try and work on a lot with people. It has a downside too, which is that if it never rains, it doesn't matter how much fertilizer you put on. So then they're mad that they spent the money and then it didn't rain and they didn't get the yield anyway. But I would say that's the one, you know, I mean, I'm a big fan of business technical assistance, and I do a lot of that, but fertility is the one with people starting out, to make them understand if they make the investment in the soil, they will get more of a yield and reward out of it.
Okay, thanks. KaZoua, do you have any
I
anything to add?
agree with David. I think fertility is a huge thing, and that's something we've been working a lot on this year with having more classes on soil regeneration. And just because you're farming organically, that doesn't mean you're regenerating the soil. So there's like that misconception of, because you're an organic farmer, you're not really being a good steward if you're just constantly trying to, your plants are addicted to drugs at this point, right? Like, you don't want to just keep doing that. You really want to heal your land and things like that. So that could be a whole nother 3-hour conversation. But another challenge that I'm seeing, and I'm also developing with other organizations, is a business model. So farmer as entrepreneurs. So we have farmers who've been in our program for 6 or 7 seasons, but they are not really good business managers. They are really good farmers, but they might not be really good at managing their businesses or how to even cultivate these relationships. And we don't want them to become dependent on our Big River Farms programs, like our markets, because when they leave, they can't sell to us. So trying to get them to understand, like, if business planning is not in their forte, then what is it that we can teach them how to set goals so that they can meet these goals and help them move along in a way where they're going to be successful when they leave? Because we don't want them to leave and they've been so dependent on us that they don't have any those infrastructures or support systems, right? So I think a business, having like a comprehensive business model or class series, that's what I'm working on right now for our farmers, is finding something that's relatable just for farmers. We've worked with other organizations that are mainly for entrepreneurs in other settings, but not for farmers. And because farmers are so unique in so many different ways, So that's one thing that is challenging. But another thing with our specific group is that we have so many different languages that we provide it in. So really providing the link, it's like there's no word for fertility or compost in our language. Compost means rotted vegetables. So there's like those language barriers in terms of interpreting and concepts. And so it's challenging when you talk about working with different groups of people, Cindy. I think it's really important to assess what kind of needs they are and not making any assumptions that they know the kind of agricultural languages that educators know, because that's the thing that we're worse at as educators, is that we go into these communities and we start, speaking these different languages. Even in English is challenging, right? And then we assume that they know what it means, but we can't make that assumption. We just have to be as practical and simplified as possible.
Thanks.
Can I chime in for a second? With the growers that I've worked with and I'm working with that are brand new to farming or only have a few years of experience, one of the challenges that I've found is getting them to not just plan, but to project the possible problems that they may encounter along this season, because there's this tendency of, okay, I'm going to plant and I'm going to grow. And then they come across these problems, and each problem seems to be like a surprise. And I'm trying to get growers to think, okay, do all of the research that you can about the possible problems you may encounter along the way during the growing season, so that you can lower your risk and do everything you can to prevent those problems from happening in the first place. And with a new grower, that's a real challenge, which goes back to record keeping. And just for me, one of the big records that I want these people to keep is, okay, when did they run into this problem? Can you take a picture of this problem? What day did it happen? And just log it along the way. And how did you resolve this problem? Was it effective or was it not effective? It is a record keeping thing, but it is also this whole mindset of, I'm going to think about this crop that I'm going to grow and plan out a strategy, not just go, oh, I'm going to pick out my seeds, but I'm going to really think about how this is going to all turn out.
Michelle, would you be able to, well, all of us, would you guys be willing to create some kind of like a community discussion session? One thing we did with Big River Farms farmers is we had a pest and disease management class, but we also had a specific class where we invited all of our farmers to come and talk about all of the pests and all of the diseases and all of the troubles that happened last year, and where they got to share with people. Because at Big River Farms, because we have such diverse crops and farming practices, we have it all. So if you want to experience and grow in those type of skills, just come and farm with us, because you will grow on all the skills and how to manage these crazy stuff. And that's one thing that was really cool that we did this year, was we had that session, that community conversation session, where people were just honest about coming into the program new and didn't know that potato beetles were so insane. We're not even growing potatoes at all this year at the farm because our potato beetles have been such a big issue. So really having those candid conversations within the community of the farmers that you're growing. So if you're working with, if the farmers are growing in different communities, maybe in that region, you can invite and do like a community conversation and say, hey, what are some of the challenges that you experienced this year? And just inviting those beginner farmers or people who are interested in farming to come into that community to listen as well and be able to ask questions, so that it can help prepare their minds mentally for the season to come.
Well, I guess one question I had for David was, you mentioned at the beginning that, coming from a farming background and thinking about like the resources that you had, that you were like, well, can this be something, a profession that is sustainable economically for a farmer maybe who has even less resources? And that is something I've thought about a lot as well, and was wondering what your answer was to that, because I don't know if I heard that in your presentation.
I will presume to answer that question, but I mean, I think it's, you know, farming is challenging in terms of like, how do you quantify the benefits of farming? How do you quantify living on the land, raising your family on the land? These are assets that have a return, but it's not a conventional return. And so I think, you know, lifestyle is a big part of farming. You know, it's being out there and it's doing whatever you think needs to be done on any given day rather than what somebody else thinks needs to be done. And you know, does it work as a business model like a factory? I mean, I think it does, but the scale has to change significantly. You know, the farms that I know that are really making it work are you know, white-owned farms that are grossing over $1 million. You know, that seems to be the point at which you have enough labor, you have all the infrastructure, you have everything else working. So then, but then that's just looking at it from a standard business mindset too, and not taking into account the, you know, I mean, I like talking about economics, but it's you know, economics does not take into those quality of life things. It does not take in, do you get to walk around outside? You know, and it's like, I don't think as a conventional business, I think small farming is difficult to be sustainable. But then when you factor in those other types of things that are part of your personal economy and how you want to live your life, then I think you do get to a point where it is sustainable.
Thank you, David and KaZoua.